I'm Chris Reigle, and this is my Restoration Ecology midterm. Restoration, in my own words, is restoration ecology is the act of restoring an ecosystem that has been damaged or disturbed. These restorations can be large scale, such as the Everglades restoration, or very small scale, such as in a local park or a small section of stream. Anything from planting a few trees to removing invasive species, erosion control, or reintroduction of native species fall under restoration ecology projects. We really need restoration ecology because we as humans sometimes inadvertently mess up ecosystems, or sometimes we do it on purpose to build a shopping center or something. Without restoration projects, a lot of the havoc we wreak would be left unchecked, and there are critical ecosystems that would fall apart without restoration trying to help it. The 1980s really brought restoration ecology in as a new profession. Some arguments against restoration could be cost, too large of a scale, or bad public opinion of the project. Let's see, three types and some examples are complete restoration would be Walnut Creek Wildlife Refuge. 3,600 acres were bought to try and restore the natural prairie ecosystem pre-European settlement. Ecological services restoration would be the Bavarian Alps carbon storage, where they restored a wetland in the Bavarian Alps to help promote carbon storage. Experimental restoration would be the Costa Rican orange peels, where they use orange peel waste to try and improve soil conditions in a Costa Rican national park. A novel community is a natural community that normally isn't found in nature. Old industrial sites, old mine tailings, and abandoned areas are examples of these. All elements in a restoration plan are the project purpose, background information of the site, the vision of the restored site, a detailed plan, and post-restoration plans for management. How to determine restoration success, the 9 attributes of a restored ecosystem. All right, so an ecosystem, it could be restoration success. It can be defined as an ecosystem that has undergone restoration is now returned to a point pre-disturbance. The 9 attributes of a restored ecosystem are: 1. The restored ecosystem contains characteristic assemblage of all the species that occur in the reference ecosystem and that provide appropriate community structure. 2. The restored ecosystem consists of indigenous species to the greatest practical extent. 3. All functional groups necessary for the continued development and stability of the restored ecosystem are represented. 4. The physical environment of the restored ecosystem is capable of sustaining and reproducing populations of the species necessary for continued stability. 5. The restored ecosystem apparently functions normally for its ecological state of development and signs of dysfunction are absent. 6. The restored ecosystem is suitably integrated into a larger ecological matrix or landscape with which it interacts through abiotic and biotic flows and exchanges. 7. Potential threats to the health and integrity of the restored ecosystem from the surrounding landscapes have been eliminated or reduced as much as possible. 8. The restored ecosystem is sufficiently resilient to endure the normal periodic stress events in the local environment that serve to maintain the integrity of the ecosystem. 9. The restored ecosystem is self-sustaining to the same degree as its reference ecosystem that has potential to exist indefinitely under existing environmental conditions. The 7 most common challenges faced are change, not knowing everything, bad record keeping, danger of the mitigation project, unique site history, conflict among users and stakeholders, and of course, money. 6 opportunities are enlarging preserves, making new habitat links like land bridges, restoring remnants, restoring ecological processes, education, and increasing community capacity. All right, so here we're going to do the landscape or the different types of restorations and some info about them. So landscape restoration would be the Alfred Codwell Lily Pool. It was in Lincoln Park, Chicago. It was a prairie river ecosystem. The Chicago Parks District was in charge. The goal was to store the park in the lily pool. The problem was the area had become degraded to overuse. Techniques included dredging the stream or creek that ran through there, planting native plants, and stonework. Small scale would be the erosion control. Lakeshore, it was in the Lakeshore Nature Preserve on UW-Madison College campus. The ecosystem was mesic forest. UW-Madison was in charge of this. The goal was to prevent further erosion and fix damage that had been done. The problem was massive erosion of hillsides from foot traffic and runoff. Technique was to use core and jute matting. I guess this one can also be experimental, but it was such a small scale, so I used it here. Maybe small scale experimental would be good. An experiment would be the Costa Rican orange peel in Guanacaste National Park in Costa Rica. It's a tropical rainforest ecosystem. The Costa Rican government was involved, as well as I think an orange juice company. Goal was to fertilize the soil. The problem was the soil was rocky and compacted, and the techniques used were just organic waste dumping of orange peels to help the soil. A volunteer would be Presidio in San Francisco. It was in San Francisco, California. It was a coastal ecosystem. The Park Conservancy and the National Park System were in charge. The goal was to restore the bluffs. The problem was degradation due to overuse and erosion. Technique was removing trails, replanting native species, and removing invasive species. On Module 2, see, an ecological community, a group of interacting species living together in the same place at the same time. They organize themselves by environmental tolerance, ability to reach the site, species interaction, and essential relationships. Ecological community dynamics is the process and change and developments of the communities. That how it's driven is change is driven by succession, disturbances, keystone species, and climate. Let's see, maximum biodiversity occurs when there are a lot of different communities at different post-disturbance stages. Disturbance can even hold an ecosystem at an early successional rate, like lots of wildfire making grasslands and not forests. Let's see, IDH says that species diversity is the highest when disturbance is neither too frequent or too rare. Regular minor disturbances like fire needed to keep an ecosystem at a successional rate. Let's see, an example was actually the one I use would be mangrove tree species like Rhizophora mangle. They keep shoreline erosion from happening. They protect inland wetlands from storm surges. They have habitats for fish, shrimp, oysters, algae, and more. They also are a huge carbon sink, to sum all that up. An ecosystem is all the living and dead organisms in an area together with the atmosphere, hydrosphere, lithosphere, and all their interactions. Energy flows to the trophic levels through primary producers, primary consumers, secondary consumers, tertiary consumers, and quaternary consumers. Let's see, a biogeochemical cycle is the reciprocal transfer of chemicals between ecosystem compartments. Like the nitrogen cycle, plants absorb nitrogen through the soil. A deer will eat the plant, which absorbs the nitrogen into the deer. The deer will die or produce waste, which then gets reabsorbed by the soil. The plants absorb the soil, never-ending cycle. Let's see, a patch is a small area that is distinct in form and composition from its surrounding, also called an island. It can be landlocked or an actual island like surrounded by water. Ideal patch geometry is a large round patch with more interior habitat, and the shape really matters. If you have a long skinny one, you don't have as much interior habitat as a big round one, even if area is the same. Ideal location is near the mainland or other natural areas with minimal edges. Let's see, 3 reasons to use a reference ecosystem. We started Module 3. 4, you need to establish a baseline. It's nice to have a reference to go back to and to set a goal for your own registration. Every site is different. It's really hard to, even get a baseline. Every ecosystem is ever changing, so they're all going to be different from each other, which is kind of along the lines of the first one. And an ecosystem can be changed due to outside forces. So again, outside forces on each site are going to be different. It's important to document stuff because it will guide future restorations, understanding your starting conditions and not having to repeat mistakes. You can use notes, audio recorder, GPS points, journal. Keeping receipts and taking photos are the easiest ones. The 3 main ways research should be incorporated are observe and collect data on similar remnants by doing a site visit and looking at research already done. Investigating the history of land you're restoring by looking at historic maps or old photos and look at the historic floral and faunal species. And then set up experiments or field trials, like seeing which methods of restoration work best by having different experimental plots at your restoration site. Reading Catsby really made me think about the goals of a restoration site. It's really weird to see the history of the Carolinas, especially, I think it was with the bison or buffalo, which, I had no idea. So the history of the site has a lot to do with the goals for restoration, makes you think how far back to go and what time period is considered natural when you're trying to restore to, a natural state. 3 categories of data you should be collecting are physiographic information, biological resources, and socioeconomic info. Let's see. All of the things are extremely important factors for what species can inhabit an area. NOAA has any information on these, as well as NASA, other online resources such as USGS, the NRCS, and the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. So, you don't even need to go to the site, just go to Google. Let's see, biological data is important because needing to know what flora and fauna can live in the area is crucial. Which species enhance the ecosystem or might hinder it, native versus non-native plants. You don't want to accidentally plate a non-native invasive species. Socioeconomic data is important because former site use is a really big one. If it's a pasture land or if it's an old park or old mine, that's important to know. Future development of surrounding areas and access to the site, for who your intended audience, pretty much. History is important because you need to know the historic land use of the site as well as any other ecosystems that have been on the site throughout time to make your best judgment call on which ecosystem type to restore the site to. All right, last module, module 4. Let's see. So they were really misguided because they kind of thought less of the people that were doing like the fires. You cannot have any bias in using true scientific knowledge. If somebody's doing something, instead of just saying, Psh, that's not going to work, maybe look at their results, maybe look at why they're doing it, and perform experiments of your own and say, oh, dang, that actually does work. So don't jump to conclusions, really. 5 common human impacts to natural areas. Soil compactation, you can limit trail use, or you can bring in gravel. That will really help soil compactation. Erosion, clear marking for trails. Don't let people go off trails. Maybe even some like wooden fences in the more sensitive areas. A lot more vegetation that'll hold all the soil. Limit trail use. Bringing in mulch or quire for the steep banks. Litter, I've actually seen trash cans along some shorter trails, and have the park rangers find people. Off-trail impacts, fences and proper marking used for areas, obviously, and cross-boundary impacts. So like public awareness, maybe where the restoration site is, so people aren't, they might, if they know something is there, they might not say, hey, let's do this, and then it'll affect your site. Any other companies or construction places working nearby, you might want to work with them to mitigate any issues. Let's see, adaptive management is working with practitioners on one side and scientists on the other side to come up with and implement good restoration plans. Working together, there's nothing to misinterpret or lose between parts of the restoration plan. Do, evaluate, and respond are the 4 key parts for adaptive management. Let's see, 5 approaches to engaging volunteers of restorations and 5 best practices. You can have them pay dues. You can help them remove trash, conduct small experiments, publishing newsletters or art projects. Citizen science is another really good one. Let's see. Oh, it said the 5 best practices are communication that speaks to their mind, outreach that affects their hearts, education that changes their behavior, matching their job skills and interests, and respecting everyone's opinions. Let's see, rednecks. What we learned about in class is, forest fires. They, for whatever reasons, like to light fires in the forest. Some people said it was because traditions, because their pappies did it. Other people knew that, hey, when we, burn the woods, we got rid of snakes and ticks and fleas and stuff like that. And some other people actually knew, hey, forest fires used to happen all the time. That Native Americans did it. So, why? Oh, it helps, primary succession and forest growth. Let's see, the federal pieces of the pieces of federal legislation to watch out for are the River and Harbors Appropriation Acts of 1899, the Clean Water Act of 1972, and the Endangered Species Act of 1973. Let's see, the 3 steps for where to place the development. You want to avoid impacts to wetlands, minimize unavoidable impacts, and offset for those impacts. Let's see, a mitigation bank is a site where resources are restored, enhanced, or preserved for the purpose of compensatory mitigation or authorized impacts. 4 options are restoration of a previous existing wetland, enhancement of an existing aquatic site, establishment of a new aquatic site, or preservation of an existing aquatic site. Let's see, the 6 categories are the loss type. Types are based on the suite of functions that they perform and how they're broken down into. So they're broken down into 3 different types, A, B, and C. A is tidal vegetated, B is seeps and bogs, C is man-made lakes and ponds. Priority category is a factor that is based off the rarity or the importance of the resource. Existing condition evaluates the site disturbances relative to the existing functional state of the system. Duration is going to be the length of time the adverse effects are supposed to last. Dominant impacts are any of these happening at the site. So if you're going to clear it, you're going to drain it, fill it, dredge it, impound it, or shade it. And the cumulative impact is a factor that's based off a calculation that the EPA came up with and has a few different things in there. Let's see. The two developer options are to buy a required amount of mitigation credits from a mitigation bank, or to actually do the restoration. Locate a nearby area needing restoration and do what you need to do to get the amount of credits. So the 6 factors are going to be the net improvement, which is a sliding scale. I believe it was from 1 to 3. Evaluation to a restoration site. Upland buffers help maintain the adjacent aquatic resources. Credit schedule recognizes the timing and likelihood of the successful implementation of the proposed plan. Temporal loss is the time lag between the loss of the aquatic resource and the replacement of that resource's functions. Kind is a factor used to compare the functions and services of the impacted aquatic resource with those of the proposed restoration site and proposed restoration resource. Location is used to compare the location of both the impacted site and the restoration sites. And last but not least, Honeycutt Creek. Overall, no, I don't think it was a success. I don't think it was a huge waste of time, but I also don't think it was as good as it really should have been. Invasive species, they came back. I know the potato vine, while native, it is also invasive and pretty harmful to that area. It doesn't look like they tried too hard to get it to go away. The type of restoration was not correct. They shouldn't have tried to make the existing wetland into a bottomland hardwood forest. That was just so much work, and it was really unnecessary. They never installed key features that were on the plan. Duck boxes and boardwalks come to mind. Boardwalk would have been really useful, when I sunk up to my waist the other day. That was crazy. They focused on restoring the wrong part of the creek. They went way downstream, almost by the pump house. Yeah, that was a really cool area that could have been something nice, but they really should have focused on the headwaters area, up by the water tower. That would have been my focus. The creek is still eroding away part of the wetlands. When we walked through the creek, you saw, the wetlands busting out, basically. Doesn't seem like their erosion control methods really worked, or they never came back to keep up with them. So, all right, hope that was good.